Natlan is the next and penultimate stop on our journey through Teyvat. Despite being mentioned all the way back in 1.0 and in the webcomic, we know almost nothing about the country. Part of this is due to the lack of Natlan NPCs throughout Teyvat. So far, we've met a whopping total of 0 Natlan characters in-game, and only a few have been mentioned in supplementary material. As frustrating as that is for a lore enthusiast like myself, it's not like we have nothing to work with. And now that Fontaine's main story is complete, it's time to start looking towards the future, towards Natlan. Natlan is the nation of pyro and war. Judging by the characters' names so far, it seems to be mostly based on pre-Columbian Mexico with additional references to various African communities. Ostensibly, it's ruled by Murata, but don't get too attached to her just yet. The respected and long-awaited Fatui harbinger Il Capitano will make his in-game debut in Natlan, as it was hinted at all the way back in 2022 during the Of Ballads and Brews event story. According to Nuviet, Capitano has joined the tribal warfare currently ravaging the nation. Natlan is home to 6 major tribes with their own rules, traditions, and customs, although there may be more smaller tribes that we've yet to hear about. These tribes are said to be in constant conflict with each other, and there's only one instance of them coming together, which we'll talk about later. Venti's companion in the webcomic Vanessa was from Natlan, and we get the majority of our information on the country from her. And that's pretty much all we know about Natlan right now. I know, it's not a lot. This is by far the most secretive country before release. I mean, we knew a decent amount about Inazuma, Sumeru, and Fontaine before they all came out, and there had been NPCs from each region. We can't say the same for Natlan, and now seems like a better time than ever to figure out why. There are a handful of Natlan characters that we've heard about so far. I think our only chance of formulating a theory about Natlan lies within these 6 people. It would be wrong to start with anyone but Murata, right? Murata is the current Pyro Archon and the God of War. She has to be at least 1,000 years old because she was alive and active during the webcomic, which happened 1,000 years ago. However, she may be significantly older than that. As I'm sure you're all aware of by now, all of the gods in Genshin are named after demons in the Lesser Key of Solomon, a real-world grimoire that provides a guide to summoning and interacting with the occult. It's rare that a character's story matches that of the demon they're named after, but it has happened before. Take Makoto or Baal, for example. In the Lesser Key of Solomon, it says that Baal is a demon with 3 faces. In Genshin, Baal ended up being one of 3 people who encompass the same identity, Makoto or Baal, A or Beelzebul, and the Raiden Shogun puppet. Little details also appear in the characters' personalities, though. Nahida's demon Buer has an affinity for plants, and Oribashi's demon Oribas only ever speaks the truth. Even Zhongli and Guizhong's demons Morax and Hagenti have similar true forms. As for Murata, it's unclear which demon she's named after. Her name actually comes from the Honkai character Himeko Murata, which isn't too out of line for Genshin. We've had people named after Honkai characters before, but I think Murata's name may be a little bit of both. There's a demon named Murmur who appears in the form of a soldier. For Genshin's God of War, that sounds pretty fitting to me. In the Travail trailer, which gave us little hints on the stories of each nation, Dainsleif says that Murata will share a secret with the Traveler. Interestingly, he also uses language that implies a theme of life and death.
The rules of war are woven in the womb. The victors shall burn bright, while the losers must turn to ash. When the God of War shares this secret with the Traveler, it is because she has her reasons.
The Archon quests for this region are even called Incandescent Ode of Resurrection. I've seen a lot of people say that they think Murata is dead and that there is no Pyro Archon, but come on. No Pyro Archon at all? As cool as that would be for the story, Hoyoverse would never dream of this. The Archons tend to be the more popular characters, which translates into more revenue for Hoyoverse. I don't think we're gonna be missing a Pyro Archon, and I doubt they'll do a similar twist to the one we saw in Fontaine with Farina and Focalor. That would be way too easy and honestly lazy. Instead, I believe Murata is alive and well, just not in the same way she once was. Her Archon quest has Resurrection in the title. I feel like that's enough info right there, but I don't want to just hang on to a theory with one tiny piece of evidence, if you can even call it that. Just remember that Murata may have been resurrected. We'll come back to this later. Ironically, the character who we know the least about is the one who appears in Travail, Yansan. Side note, I'm not sure how to properly pronounce her name, and I couldn't find anything when I looked for an answer, so if you know how to pronounce her name, please let me know. Yansan is a little girl with long ears similar to Klee's or Nahida's. That makes me think that she's likely non-human, perhaps of the same race as Klee. The Genshin Impact Wiki says that Yansan may be named after the Yoruba deity Oya Yansan-an, who presides over fire, death, and rebirth. If that connection is intentional, that just adds more to Natlan's huge theme of life and death. But other than that, I have literally nothing on Yansan. Moving on, we've got a pretty big character, Tenoch. He lived 1,000 years ago though, so I doubt we'll see him in-game. But with how influential he was, I'm sure we'll hear about him and see the effects of his legacy. Tenoch is named after a famous Aztec historical figure by the same name. The ancient capital of the Aztec Empire in what is now Mexico City, Tenochtitlan, was named after him. In Genshin, Tenoch was kicked out of his tribe for unknown reasons. On his way out, he noticed a turbid black tide growing on the horizon and sought to gather people from each of the 6 main tribes to defeat it. It's unclear what this turbid black tide is exactly. On one hand, I can see this being some kind of apocalyptic destruction similar to Salvin Dagnir or Conria because the description reminds me of that. But on the other hand, there's no evidence of any conflicts with Celestia at this time. So I think the turbid black tide Tenoch witnessed was the formation of the Mare Javari, which is a dark, uninhabitable plain of ash at the edge of Natlan. Somewhat hilariously, his weapon is called the Talking Stick, although judging by the description of both the weapon and its wielder, I doubt it was used for talking. After a long and arduous journey, Tenoch was able to successfully recruit people from each tribe, including his sworn enemy, the giant Tupac. It's unclear if the Black Tide was ever subdued or if any of its assailants survived. If I'm right about this black tide being the formation of the Mare Javari, I doubt anyone lived through that. The only person who ever entered the Mare Javari and survived was the Lava Walker, but even he eventually died there. And now we come to my favorite person so far, Splanke. I know what you're all thinking. Lexi, how can your favorite Natlan character be some random dude we've never heard about? Hear me out. This guy is named after a Mayan mythological figure by the same name. The only mention of Splanke was in Nuviet's official introduction, where he spoke about the Sovereigns. Someday, when they, the Sovereigns, return, their true ordeal shall begin. This tells us a couple things about Splanke already. 1, he's aware of the Sovereigns and their conflict with the Gnosis, and 2, he seemingly sides with the Sovereigns, not the Archons or Celestia. Besides that, everything I've gathered on Splanke comes from his real-world mythological counterpart. In Mayan mythology, Splanke is one of the 2 Maya hero twins, along with his brother Hunahpu. I won't make this video entirely about their myths, but I had a really great time reading them, and I highly recommend you check them out for yourselves. Trust me when I say the story does not go the way you think it's going to. Long story short, Splanke and Hunahpu are humanoid jaguars who have an inexplicable ability to repeatedly trick the lords of the underworld. Hunahpu performs most of the action, but this causes him to get injured more often than his brother. For example, he gets his arm ripped off, then is later decapitated. Upon his brother's death, Splanke allowed the lords of the underworld to kill him and his brother's body by burning them in a furnace. However, this was all part of Splanke's plan. The brothers rose from the dead and gained the power to reverse death and destruction, even their own. There are several instances of Splanke and Hunahpu burning buildings down, then reviving them as if nothing had ever happened. Once they had defeated the lords and escaped the underworld, the brothers climbed all the way up into the sky where Hunahpu became the sun and Splanke became the moon. Once again, we see a theme of life and death, especially in relation to fire. I really hope Genshin leans into Splanke's real-world mythology because I think that would make him such an interesting character, especially because he seems to know something about the Sovereigns. I can totally see him being interested in reviving the Sovereigns in a way. I don't think he is a Sovereign, but I definitely don't think Splanke is going to be a human either. We really do know nothing about this guy yet, though. I might be wrong about him being a man, even. It wouldn't be the first time Hoyoverse has disregarded gender norms. Nevertheless, I'm very excited to see how Splanke's real-life myths translate into Genshin's lore and perhaps Natlan's overall story as well. Let's shift gears to a character we already know, Il Capitano, one of the 11 Fatui Harbingers. It's unknown what his rank is right now, but I've seen a lot of people say they think he's the first. Personally, I'm inclined to agree. I just can't see any of the other unranked Harbingers being number 1, and Capitano seems to have made quite the name for himself throughout Teyvat, unlike some other Harbingers. In the Of Ballads and Brews event story, Grandmaster Varka sends a letter back to Mondstadt that states he met Capitano. Despite the tension between the Knights of Favonius and the Fatui, Capitano and Varka remained polite and non-violent. In Mika's 4th character story, it's revealed that Varka would have actually liked to duel the Harbinger and that Capitano has glowing blue eyes. At the end of the Fontaine Archon quest, Nuviet tells us that Capitano has recently arrived in Natlan and has thrown his hat into the nation's endless ring of war. His choice to join in on Natlan's constant warfare makes me think that he may be from the country. Why else would he care to get involved? As is typical of Genshin, Capitano is named after a character that exists in the real world. All of the Fatui Harbingers are named after stock characters from a form of Italian theater called Commedia dell'arte. Capitano is named after, you guessed it, Capitano. Commedia Capitano's function is to be exposed as a liar and a coward despite his incessant attempts to convince people otherwise. It's widely agreed that he's not even a real military captain, and he only calls himself that to impress people. Author John Rudlin describes Capitano as a peacock who has molted all but one of his tail feathers but does not know it. I can kinda see that in Genshin's Capitano too. Being a Fatui Harbinger, you'd imagine he'd get into conflict with the knights upon encountering them. Instead, he chose not to fight them, although we're unaware of his reasoning. I think the true parallel between Commedia Capitano and Genshin Capitano will be his mask though. Capitano is the only Fatui Harbinger whose mask covers his entire face, and in Commedia, his entire purpose is to be exposed for who he truly is. It literally says he has to be demasked on his Wikipedia page, go look it up. With glowing eyes like that, I don't think Capitano is human. And with a namesake like that, I think we'll see his true identity, maybe even species, revealed in Natlan. The last character I want to talk about is the previous Pyro Archon. For a long time, we've been under the impression that all but 2 of the original Archons have died. However, Zhongli's 5th character story was recently updated to include some suspicious language. As time passed, many of the Seven's titles changed hands, and only 2 of the first 7 remained in positions of rulership, Rex Lapis and the Animo Archon. Notice how it doesn't say that the originals all died? It just says that they didn't remain in positions of rulership. Before this was updated, it said that only 2 remain of the first 7, which is why we used to think that they were all dead. But now that Hoyoverse has deliberately altered the way that this situation is described, I think there's a chance that another one of the original Archons is still out there somewhere, just not acting as an Archon anymore. I know that sounds silly, but we've literally seen this happen before. Zhongli is one of the original Archons, and he's just chilling, not as an Archon anymore. With how little we know about the current Pyro Archon and even the old one, I could see this being the case for them. Alternatively, Natlan has a huge theme of life, death, and resurrection. It may be possible that the old Pyro Archon died and was reborn as Murata. However, I don't really like that concept because it's too similar to what we saw with Nahida and Rukdevada. The third and most compelling option is that the old Pyro Archon currently lives in the Mari Javari where no one can ever find them. In the Lava Walker artifact description, it's mentioned that a lone phoenix lives in the Mari Javari. People often hear cries coming from the region, although they're unsure if these are from the now-deceased Lava Walker or if they're the songs of the phoenix. Phoenixes are mythological creatures that burn themselves to death then are reborn from the ashes. Who's to say that the old Pyro Archon hasn't taken the form of a phoenix and hidden themselves away in this ominous sea of ash? The formation of the Mari Javari, which I'm 99% sure is the black tide Tenoch fought, may have been due to the Pyro Archon's death and rebirth as this phoenix. It's theorized that Tenoch's witnessing of the turbid black tide occurred around 1,000 years ago, which is how old people think Murata is. I'm not saying this is true, I'm just saying it all seems to line up pretty conveniently. It's so hard to predict how Natlan's story is gonna play out. Every time I try to guess where Genshin is going next, they take a massive left turn and leave me with more questions than I could ever dream of answering. But I have correctly predicted plot points before, so I would be dumb to give up now. I can guarantee Murata's secret is that she has been reincarnated some way or another. If I'm wrong about that, you can all unsubscribe and send me hate mail. I know that this has to be her secret. It's way too obvious. I also think we may see a battle between Murata and Capitano over her Gnosis. Being the god of war, I don't think Murata would just give up the key to her power without a fight. We do still have a glaring issue to address. Why are there no Natlan NPCs? I have a couple possible explanations that we can all choose from, but honestly, I don't know if any of these are even feasible. 1. Natlan's borders, like Inazuma's were, are closed. This may be due to the war going on there. However, Capitano recently entered the country, but he may have been allowed back in because it's his homeland. 2. There are no humans left in Natlan. We heard from Nuviet that humans and dragons coexist there. Maybe the dragons have wiped out all of the humans, or humans have gone extinct there and are now all human-dragon hybrids. This would explain the lack of Natlan NPCs because a separate character model would have to be designed for these humanoid dragons. Or 3. Hoyoverse just forgot or doesn't care to add Natlan NPCs right now. Honestly, this sounds like the most realistic explanation to me. We didn't see any Inazuma NPCs until right before the country was released, so maybe we'll see some start popping up in the near future. I do kinda like the idea of there being no humans left in Natlan though. 5 of the 6 Natlan characters I discussed earlier all have characteristics that make me believe they're not human. Capitano's glowing eyes, Jansen's abnormally long ears, and Splanke's namesake being a were-jaguar all seem pretty non-human to me. Perhaps humans did exist in large numbers at one point in Natlan, but they've dwindled in recent years to a point where there's barely any full humans left. In a nation endlessly trapped in war, people are gonna be dying left and right. Humans could have extincted themselves there by now. Sadly, Natlan is still a ways away. We're only in 4.3 right now, and with Genshin's history, we can expect another 5 patches before we get to Natlan. With each patch lasting 6 weeks, that's about 7 months of waiting, give or take. I'm making this video now so I can hopefully add on to it as we get closer and closer to Natlan's release. I really hope we see a few Natlan NPCs populating around the map soon, but I doubt it. Instead, I think we should keep an eye out for any mentions of Natlan we get, big or small. I mean, the talking stick weapon description, as silly as it is, told us all about Tenoch and the tribal warfare of the region. Without that, we wouldn't have had all those details about the country. Natlan has a lot of potential to be unlike anything we've ever seen in Genshin. I know I'm looking forward to it. And please feel free to let me know your ideas and predictions for Natlan too. Thank you so much for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and I'll see you next time.